Welcome to I Got Back Up, Getting Back Up With. I'm Talia Lazarus, your host, and in August 2021, my whole life changed. I was in a road accident, which led me to 10 weeks of no walking, knee surgery that September, and double knee surgery in February 2022. After learning how to walk again in my 20s, my journey took me on a physical, emotional, and mental roller coaster, and I was broken and lost in every way. But then I learned I had the ability to change my own life and write my own story. So think of a taboo subject that's not always spoken about. Here we confront it and run towards it head on. Rock bottom becomes a safe and comfortable place. Rising from the ashes, taking control of your life, and showing up to your fears takes something extraordinary. The hardest step is the first one, but once you take it, you're already one step ahead of yesterday and one step closer to everything you have ever dreamt of. The biggest moment in my life of getting back up was from feeling absolutely worthless and learning to appreciate myself, describes Faith Dickey, professional highliner and owner of Elevate Outdoors. After a car accident gave Faith a wake-up call, her life completely changed direction. Her path led her to a slackline festival, which shortly led her to becoming a professional highliner and beating world records. However, her 20s led her through injuries and burning out, which in turn took her to rock bottom. Feeling totally worthless and questioning, who am I? If she wasn't Faith Dickey, the highliner, who sets records and highlines all the time, then who was she beyond the sport? Challenge your fears and you walk them, one small step at a time. So how has Faith's life fast-tracked her and forced her to engage with her fears? How did she navigate through rock bottom and discover her new purpose in highlining? So today I'm with Faith. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. And where in the world are you?
I'm in Moab, Utah, USA.
That is absolutely beautiful. And are you in the mountains?
Sort of. It's a desert here, but it's all like a landscape of cliffs and canyons. So there's two national
Yeah.
parks here. It's an amazing place. And there's mountains right next to Moab.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. I'm gonna put it on my list. It's gonna go up there. So today we're going to talk all about your story, kind of right from the beginning, and obviously where and why you are now doing what you're doing. And it's, all over to you from here.
Well, I grew up in Austin, Texas, and that's a city, and it's a really cool city, but there's no mountains there. I was a pretty normal kid. I didn't really do anything extreme. I wasn't a gymnast. People often like to ask, like, were you a gymnast? But no, I was pretty average in all ways, an average athlete, an average person. I was really passionate about fashion design, actually, at the time. And so I was planning to go to New York City and become a fashion designer. But I come from a single parent home and we didn't really have money growing up. And so I was totally on my own as far as funding my university experience. And as some of your listeners might know, university in the USA is extremely expensive. So it's a big challenge to be able to go and fund your education. So I was working like 5 jobs. I was 18, 19 years old, and I fell asleep driving my car. And I passed out, and the car flipped over and slid to a stop. And it was really a crazy experience. I'd never been in an accident like that. But I was okay. And I just had a bit of a wake up call. Like, what am I doing? Like, I've never even left the country. I'm setting myself on this path that's, I've wanted to do forever, but I was also staring at a lot of debt. And, the fashion industry is a precarious industry. You're not guaranteed success by any means. So I quit half my jobs and I started spending a bunch of time in this park in Austin. And one day I was there and it's a beautiful park with huge trees and there was a swimming pool and I saw the slackline set up between trees. I didn't know what it was. I'd never seen a slackline before. This was in 2008. And I was with a friend that day and he said, "Oh, have you ever tried this?" And I was like, No, I've never seen that before. And he's like, "Come on, like, it's really cool." So I stood up on this line with his hand and it seemed impossible. And I was like, that's cool, but that's impossible. So we continued with our day. We went swimming. I didn't think more about it. But as I continued to go to that park and just I was really taking time for myself, sitting there reading and journaling and just kind of thinking about what path I wanted to take. And I kept seeing that darn slack line. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go try it again. And so that day I just like spent hours with this guy who'd set up the slack line between trees. And it was so hard to take a single step. And it was so frustrating, but I was like, I have to do it. I have to do it. And when I finally did take a step, I was hooked. It was such a cool experience. I never felt like that before, standing on a line and just being so focused and kind of tuning out everything around me. It was almost an escape, like a bit of a vacation for my mind to just be so concentrated on one thing. So that was a bit the beginning of the end. I still had no plans to be a highliner or be a professional athlete or anything. None of that crossed my mind. But I started spending a bunch of time at the park slacklining, and I got better and better. And I remember that guy who I started with, he told me about highlining, which is, for the listeners, slacklining high off the ground, where you use a harness and a leash. He told me about it, but I was in Texas and I wasn't a rock climber, and so I was like, well, that's never going to be me. Like, how would I ever access any of that? So a year went by, and I was still working and still kind of mulling over what I wanted to do with my life. And I decided to go backpacking around Europe, a pretty common choice for young Americans. But I had all this money I'd saved from working so hard, and I wasn't sure about my, plans to go to New York and study. And so I decided to buy a one-way ticket to London. And I ended up flying to London with one contact, this guy who I'd met when I was traveling around the US a little bit when I was 18. And he was super nice at first, turned out to be a total asshole. But all part of the story. It all worked out because I was like in London for 4 months, working several illegal jobs. The pound was worth twice as much as the dollar back then, so like half my savings were wiped out when I arrived. And I was a bit lost and aimless, but I had my slackline with me. And a bit, 4 months go by, and London was like trying to spit me out the entire time. It's a hard place to be, especially as like a naive 19-year-old who doesn't know what they're doing. And so I finally ended up going to Germany to visit a friend who was an au pair, and she was like, "You have to go to Berlin. Berlin is amazing." And so I got on couch surfing, which I don't know if that exists anymore, but at the time, couch surfing was this great website where you could contact people to stay on their couches when you were traveling. And there was a whole rating system, and, maybe it was back in the day when people were a little more naive, but I contacted all these people on couch surfing, like, who's going to host me? I'm coming to Berlin. And out of like 15 requests, only one guy responded. And he was a slackliner. He had a picture of a slackline on his profile. And he said, "Hey, I'm not going to be home that weekend. I'm going to a slackline festival." And I was like, "What? There's festivals?" And my mind was blown. And I was like, "Well, can I go?" He's like, "Yeah, of course. Like, we can meet up on the way, and there's going to be a bunch of slackliners there, and you camp." And so I completely threw away my ticket to Berlin, bought a new ticket, kind of like met up by train with this guy in southern Germany, and then ended up at the slackline festival where I met one of his friends from Poland, and I saw my first long slacklines, and I tried my first highline. They had set up a highline between like the top of a climbing gym and this kind of utility water tower thing. And I'd never really been high off the ground. Like, I'd climbed a couple times, but I wasn't a climber. I didn't know how to tie the knots, and it was such an intense experience. I felt like all my slacklining knowledge was out the window. I felt pretty accomplished at the time, low to the ground, but being just, something like 80 feet up, I was so terrified, and I had never experienced fear like that. And my body was gripped. I was sitting on that line trying to stand up, telling myself over and over, "You can do it. You can do it." And my body just would not react. It was wild. But I threw myself at it as hard as I could. And I fell probably like, I don't know, 17, 20 times. I was totally battered. I just like went as hard as I could until I couldn't get up anymore. And what happens when you fall on a highline? So you're wearing a harness, like a climbing harness, and you have a leash, which is a a tether, and that leash follows you as you walk. And that's so if you do fall, you don't die. So you take what we call a whipper, and you fall and take like a little swing, and you're about a meter, maximum a meter and a half below the high line. So when that happens, you have to climb the leash to get back up. And that there's a special technique for that. And once you know it, it's not that bad. But if you don't know it, it seems impossible. And it does require some upper body strength, which I had none of. I mean, I'd been like hanging out in pubs in London for 4 months, drinking way too much, like Fosters, and like I was not in shape. So yeah, climbing the leash seemed impossible, and I was able to do it a few times, but then I was so pumped I couldn't climb up anymore, and I actually had to get rescued off the high line, which was humiliating. You know, I just felt a little bit like a beached whale out there, like dangling, having to get a guy to come give me a hand and pull me up. So that was kind of the start of my determination. I thought like, okay, I'm not good at this. I don't have a knack. Like, there's no secret talent for highlining buried in me, but I have to walk one line. I just have to know what it's like to conquer this fear that's holding me back, because physically I'm able to do this. If this line was between two trees on the ground, I could walk it easily. So why, when it's a little bit high off the ground, can I suddenly no longer do it? And I was so interested in that the way we create barriers in our minds, and those barriers prevent us from doing things, even if it's the same exact thing in a different environment. So I ended up traveling to Poland with one of the guys I met at this festival, and got on several more highlines, and I think I like failed at like 5 highlines. I mean, every time I was able to take some steps, but I would fall, and take some steps and fall. And I was so frustrated. And finally, one day we were doing this highline in this really beautiful area in Poland, and it was a new line, like no one had walked it before. And we, at that time, you know, we were really pioneering the way. There wasn't really social media about highlining. Like Facebook was around, but there was no Instagram, there was no TikTok. There wasn't a wealth of information online, you know, to learn from or to see people doing things. So a lot of what we did was trial and error, and us learning as we went, and learning from each other too. And I was just trying so hard to cross this line, and it seemed so impossible. And I remember I was crying. I was like sitting on the rock tower, crying because I was so frustrated. Like, why can't I not overcome this fear and this resistance? And finally something worked, and I was able to like fight my way across the line. And when I stepped onto the rock on the other side, and we call it sending, I had sent the line without falls. It was such an incredible feeling. I usually say it was like seeing color for the first time, because it was this crazy mix of like exhilaration, adrenaline, like pride, happiness. I mean, mega endorphins, but also just so satisfying to know that I could overcome such a huge mental barrier. So that was really the beginning of the end, because I had reached my goal of walking one high line. I was like, that's all I wanted to do. But when I actually walked a high line, I was like, I can't stop now. This feeling is too good. And that kind of snowballed into me devoting about a decade of my life to it. And along with that guy, the Polish guy, and the guy from Germany that I had met initially on couchsurfing, we formed a team together. We were all really driven, and we wanted to go establish highlines where highlines had never been before. And so all these kind of chance encounters and, you know, like choices I made, but ultimately a lot of luck as well, I was able to devote my life to highlining for a long time. And we were some of the first professional highliners. I mean, at that time it was so niche, so few people knew about it. But we very soon recognized, like, okay, there's no way we can do this at a high level and as much as we want to while working a full-time job. Like, those things aren't going to mix. So we were dirtbags. I mean, I'm really proud of like how much we did with so little money. We hitchhiked
Yeah.
all over Europe with, like 30, 35 kilo backpacks. We did whatever it took to go to places and climb and establish highlines. And pretty quickly, I ended up setting a world record for women. It wasn't my intention. I was just super driven. And within, within 6 months of beginning highlining, I broke the world record for women that had already existed. And, it was interesting because I think being a kid that I'd never excelled at anything. And so it wasn't really in my mindset that I could excel at something. I just was very focused and stubborn, and I wanted to do these things, and go hard. And so that first feeling of whoa, I've done something no one else has done was really empowering. It was really empowering and really cool because it wasn't the goal. It was a side effect of me just getting out of my comfort zone and pushing my limits and being okay with failure too. There was a lot of failure to get to that point.
Yeah.
Well, I can keep going. Is there anything you want to ask?
Well, no, I was going to say, I think that's the important thing, isn't it? It's to know when you confront your fears or you take risks that there is a chance of failure, and that even if you fail, to get back, on the slack line and to keep going in a way.
Exactly. I think that's really true for many things in life. And an interesting thing that occurred, so, I can kind of speed through the next 6 years of my highline career, but I continued to beat my own records and set new ones, and at various times held the world record with men, which was really cool because I was able to level the playing field and really prove that there's no difference in ability based on gender in this sport. And I traveled the world, and I was a sponsored athlete, and had amazing experiences. And so, time passed, and I always thought in my mind, it's really cool, these things I've done, but they're not me. But then I sort of started to deal with injuries because I'd been so hard on my body, and being young and in my 20s, I didn't know how to rest, and I didn't know how to recover or rehab or anything. So my knees really became extremely painful, and I found myself really burnt out from traveling and highlining all the time, and just being in pain too while I was doing this thing that I loved. And it was, perhaps a huge lesson in moderation, and that you can turn what you love into a career, but if you aren't moderate about it, you can get burnt out even on that thing you love.
Yeah.
And so I went through a kind of rock bottom, so to speak. Some people beat my records. I wasn't really trying to hold them, and this whole time I was running this women's highline meeting, which is a festival for women. And the whole time I was trying to get more women into the sport and trying to raise the level of women athletes. So all along I was saying verbally, of course I want people to beat my records. I'm not special. The only reason I have these records is because I went so hard, there's got to be other people out there who can do what I did. And so, one part of me was really looking for that to happen, for other women to surpass me, and to also to prove to myself that we're all capable of amazing things.
Yeah.
But when I actually lost some records, I mean, they're not really losses, but I wasn't trying to keep them. I wasn't training. I wasn't trying to be the best anymore. And so when some records got broken and I was injured and I couldn't perform the way I'd been performing before, I felt totally worthless. Suddenly I felt like, who am I? What's my purpose in the world? If I'm not the best at this, I'm worthless. And I'm kind of summarizing a several year realization, but I figured out that along the course of my highline career, my identity was totally fusing with my achievements. I thought my worth was based on what I did, not that I was worthy just
Okay.
intrinsically. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it really snuck up on me, but it was really painful and hard to go through that. And I'm actually thankful for the injuries I had, because it forced me to recognize that that's a totally fragile existence to live in if all of your worth is based on your achievements, instead of just intrinsically feeling your value as a human being on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been really cool, because over those few years that I was experiencing that rock bottom and kind of feeling lost and not really sure what my purpose was, and I still highlined a bit, and I was climbing, you know, I still loved the activities of being outdoors, but it wasn't the same.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel obsessed with it like I had before. And I simply didn't know who I was if I wasn't Faith Dickey, the raging highliner who sets records and highlines all the time. And I had to figure out who I was beyond those sports. And I feel super privileged, because for most people the pandemic was this really awful experience, but living in this small town in Utah that's a tourism economy, I was so fortunate that I got to enjoy time off of work, and I started gardening, and I, you know, stopped climbing and highlining. And I don't know, I just had all this time to experience happiness and contentment without it being based on achieving something, you know? Like nobody cares about my great tomato that I grew. At least from a, you know, broad perspective. Like no company is going to pay me for my like wonderful tomato. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I just loved doing it. And it was a reminder of why I started highlining in the first place. I started highlining and I started climbing and I started doing these outdoor activities because I loved them, and I loved the experience of navigating fear and learning how to manage it. And so suddenly a decade later, I was learning an entirely new lesson, which was cool, because sometimes you think you've plateaued, like there's nothing more to learn. And here I was like, oh shit, there's so much more to learn. And it's really cool, because now I am starting to enjoy highlining the way I used to, where I'm not out there to perform. I'm not out there with a specific achievement goal. I'm there because I'm curious about the experience, and I'm curious about my mind and what it's going to feel like. And I've recently, in the last 2 years, I started forming this guiding company so I can guide highlining, which no one is doing in the USA. And Moab is a mecca for guided sports. I've been guiding climbing and canyoneering the last 2 years. And it was such a like aha moment for me of, oh, like I want to share what I've learned. Like I'm not fulfilled by having records or being the best. I'm fulfilled by sharing what I know with others and helping them succeed. And it feels so good to finally find a new purpose in the sport that reflects who I am now. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that that kind of rock bottom was a failure in a way. Like I was no longer the best. I was kind of a nobody, like to myself. You know? And in many ways, I just wanted to shrink away and disappear. Like, you know, I'm well known in the highline world and the slackline world, and I felt so much shame about not being the best anymore. But it's insane to hold us to these impossible standards of being the best all the time. And so, you know, the name of your podcast for me really reflects getting back up from that. You know, like, sure, I got back up on highlines a million times to send them and set records. But the biggest moment in my life of getting back up was feeling absolutely worthless and learning to feel worthy and appreciate myself regardless of what I'm doing on the outside.
Yeah. And I think that's amazing because you're right. A lot of people, and I'm sure, you know, in the past as well, you put so much pressure on getting the grade or being the best at this or doing the best at that, or making sure you're the highest potential at something, and if you don't do it, you can feel worthless. And it's not being defined by that. It's not being defined by, if I didn't do XYZ, then I'm not good enough.
Exactly.
And I think I think that's the really important message, is that obviously you can go for your dreams and you can go for the goals and you can go for the targets of 100%, but it's almost like enjoy the journey along the way. Enjoy the route, because hopefully you will get those things, but enjoy the journey, because that's actually the most beautiful part. And what I love is that you can look at the sport again in a way that you used to see it.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I think that, like, it's still so valuable to have goals and to try to achieve things, right? Like, we don't want to just go through life like a lump or whatever. But I think if you can separate your value from the outcome, you'll have a much better experience, and it's easier said than done. It's not like I go look at a high line that I set up and don't want to walk it successfully, but I want to leave that experience feeling just as much self-worth, no matter what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And even starting this business is another way for me to utilize my own lessons that I'm teaching others. And I definitely struggle with imposter syndrome, like, who are you to run a business? Who are you to teach people? And it's just these voices in our heads. And so much of the experience is, me telling myself, one step at a time, one step at a time, one step at a time. Like, of course I have goals, and of course I hope it becomes this dream I have. But I also know that even if it doesn't, I'm just as valuable a human being on this planet as if it does.
Yeah.
But yeah, and in regards to fear, I mean, I think fear is a bit of a paltry word to describe all the different emotions that are tied to it. But on a high line, it's like the first fear I really had to learn to navigate was a primal fear, this kind of instinct to stay away from the cliff edge.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main ways that I got over that fear and was able to overcome it was by continuing to do the thing,
Yeah.
And it's like, so much of the time we just don't want to be uncomfortable. So we avoid being uncomfortable in any way, even though that period of being uncomfortable can lead to like massive growth. And, in my case, looking through the lens of highlining, like, I can recognize that I'm a lot less scared than other people in a lot of situations. I can very comfortably stand on the top of a ladder. I can very comfortably stand on a roof. I can very comfortably stand on a cliff edge. And it's because I have trained my mind to not jump into a fight or flight response.
Yeah.
And obviously we all, I think, just generally have different levels of that. Like, I do think we just have different chemical outputs in our brains. And so for some person, approaching a cliff edge is going to be so much harder than, what it was for me when I started the sport. Mm-hmm. But I do think by, it sounds so cliche, but facing your fears, by constantly just desensitizing yourself to them and training your mind, like, I'm okay. This feels like I'm going to die, but I'm okay. Once again, I'm okay. I think it's a really good way to navigate those experiences.
Yeah. And obviously with those fears that you've been able to conquer or that you show up for, you've then, from what you've done in the sport, you've brought it into your everyday personal life.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I have to remind myself sometimes. I think it's often easier to share advice with others than to apply it to our own lives. But still, I can see how, like, from the perspective of starting a business, it's a scary thing. You don't know if you're going to succeed. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of aspects of it that are very unfamiliar to me, or things I'm not good at right now, just from like the back end side of things. And I do feel like the lessons I learned on the high line, I can apply to this experience by, taking deep breaths and talking to those voices in my mind. I mean, a really cool technique that I've kind of adapted into my climbing and highlining life, which, you know, comes from therapy, but it's, I think very applicable, is sort of talking to the parts of me that are afraid, or the parts of me that are resistant to the experience, you know, like, oh, hey, Faith, like, I totally get why you're scared. You know, it's really daunting. Like, it makes total sense that you feel that way. And you really want to protect, you know, the other Faith from experiencing pain or disappointment.
Yeah.
But like, we got this. Let's just try. We'll never know if we don't try.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, you know, whenever I want to like share something with people that I hope is a takeaway they can have from my story, it's that
Mm.
if you avoid risk, you never know what you're capable of. And it you know, it doesn't mean you don't break your goals into bite-sized chunks, and it doesn't mean that you don't fail sometimes, but if you just stay in that like comfort bubble that's, you know, never pushes you, you're never going to know what you're capable of, ever.
Yeah.
I mean, so many
Yeah.
people think like, I can't learn a language. You know, I'm not good at languages. And it's like, well, have you ever actually tried?
Yeah. 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 But I am someone that did that. You know, I'm someone that completely fell into that. You know, here I am training for a half marathon, and 6 months ago, I was the someone that said, I'm never going to be able to run a half marathon. Those were my words. I used to say
Yeah.
it's impossible. And now I'm training to run one. So that, in its sense, it's exactly it, because I fell into the trap of, you know, you really do not know what you're capable of until you decide to say, actually, I'm going to show this thing that I think is impossible that it's actually not impossible.
Yep. And that the way you pace yourself is very personal. You don't have to
Yeah.
compare yourself to someone else. I don't even think that helps, actually. I think you have to choose the way you push yourself based on what you're like, the level of discomfort you're able to accept. And it's different for
Yeah.
everybody. When I coach people on highlines, they're not all the same. There's some people who I can tell they kind of want to be pushed. Like, they want to be pushed to the point of a little bit of pain. And there's other people who I can see that the experience of just being that high off the ground is so intense for them. That's enough. Just getting them out there is enough. And
Yeah.
so I think it's so important, as we challenge ourselves and try to, you know, get unstuck from these stories we tell ourselves, it's good to get out of your comfort zone, but also find a way to do that you don't abuse yourself. You know, like, there's
Yeah.
definitely a way you could train for the marathon that would result in injuries. So, and very similar to me, like, the first few years I was highlining, I was so determined that I destroyed my knees and got injured because I didn't know how to
Yeah.
pace myself, you know? And so it's a hard lesson to learn, but I feel like I'm much better at it now.
Yeah. And I think it was something really important that you said, in the sense of, you know, one person's fear or one person's goal, or, you know, however one person's doing something, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the correct way for you to be doing it as well. So, you know, you can try it, but if you can't maybe do it the same way that someone else is doing whatever it is, that's okay, because there's probably a million other ways that are more tailored to you. And I think that's
Exactly.
a big lesson. That's a big lesson, because then that's where some people might give up, and they might think, you know, the fear's getting involved. I'm going to give up now. I can't do it like that person. But if you don't give up and you continue to chase, you know, challenge your fears, you'll find out your own way of doing it.
I mean, it's funny how humans have a tendency to, like, we compare ourselves to people who are way above us, you know, like, even myself, I like compare myself to these like super athletes, like, oh, I'm not good enough because I'm not like the super athlete. And it's like, I completely ignore all the people who are doing way less than me, you know, when
Yeah.
I'm drawing those comparisons. And so it's like, I think just drawing comparisons is practically useless. You know,
Yeah.
it's either going to make you feel totally inadequate, or you're going to compare yourself to people who have had a totally different life story than you, who maybe have
Yeah.
experienced absolutely different challenges than you. I mean, I'm super aware that my privilege as a white woman enabled me to live this lifestyle. You know, I don't think a person of color would have had the same experience hitchhiking around Europe.
Yeah.
I just think that there's so many ways we have lived different stories, but it doesn't mean you don't try, you know, and create
Yeah.
goals, you know? Yeah, but I mean I really like resonate with what you said about the marathon too, because I've always said like I'm not a runner. I hate running. Running hurts. You know, I have like this trauma from having shin splints in high school basketball. And recently, in the last 2 months, I started running a mile every time I went to the gym. You know, in the winter here, it's like pretty cold, so I got a gym membership just to exercise. And every time, like, I was just staring at the clock on the treadmill, like, oh my God, when is this? It was usually about 15 minutes, you know, like, when is this? Just counting down. But I was like, look at me. I'm like running multiple miles a week, and I've always thought I
Yeah.
couldn't run. So,
Yeah.
and I think it's good to remember that even the people we really look up to who seem like super athletes, they have something else in life that they don't believe in themselves about, you know, or there's something else
Yeah.
that they are challenged by.
Yeah. 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 I think that's important to know is people are challenged by so many different things, and also what you see online, then not everyone's necessarily sharing their challenges anyway. So, the
Totally.
super athletes and people that you can see, you don't always know what's going on behind.
Exactly. I mean, there's probably a good portion of famous people in the realm of whatever you think of who have like crippling social anxiety, you know? Like there's so many things that humans are afflicted by, and we are all facing challenges every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's one piece of advice then that you would give if someone came to you and they said they were absolutely terrified to try something? There's something that they want to something new, whether it's a sport or whether it's building a business, whatever it is, but they are terrified to start. What would you say to them?
I would probably tell them a few things. I would give them some practical methods for dealing with
Hmm.
that anxiety and fear. And that would be, for starters, take 10 deep breaths, like really
Yeah.
deep breaths. Calm your body down. I mean, that's such an important technique when I'm on a high line and my body is feeling a stress response. Because if you're breathing slowly, your heartbeat decreases, like all these like physiological effects happen. And it can kind of
Hmm.
trick you into being less stressed than you are. And I guess
Hmm.
the next advice I would give is that, like I never thought I was going to amount to anything that I've amounted to. And the only reason I did was because I tried. And so
Yeah.
I really think it's like, just try, just see, be curious. And when you enter into that challenge, be curious of how you respond. Look at it like a learning opportunity. It doesn't have to end the way you want it to for you to learn and grow as a person. The most cliche thing is one step at a time. Take it one step at a time. If the big goal is terrifying, take one step towards it. What can you do right now that's one step towards it? Say you
Yeah.
want to become a rock climber and
Yeah.
you're so scared of heights. Okay, go to a climbing gym. Just go. Don't even like commit to climbing. Just go and hang out at the climbing gym. That's one step. And if you feel totally comfortable doing that, grab a couple holds and climb a couple feet off the ground. You know?
Yeah.
Just inch your way towards your goals.
Yeah. And I think that's, as humans, I think what happens is the thing that scares us the most are the things that we then don't, you were saying that you then don't do.
Mm-hmm.
And, from your whole story and everything we've spoken about is those things, when they show up in your life, it's doing them anyway,
Yeah, I think
because
that's
some of the
spot
coolest things
on.
happens after.
Yep.
Yeah. So where are your favorite places that you have highlined?
Oh my gosh. Well, Chamonix in France is definitely really high on the list. Um, Doing some alpine highlines there is just mind blowing. They're very hard to get to. They take
Yeah.
a lot of planning and skills to set up. And then once you're on the line, you're dealing with, you know, altitude and all these other challenges. But the view, like between mountain peaks in an alpine environment like that, is insane. I mean, it's just incredible, and it feels otherworldly. So that's definitely high on my list. I spent a lot of time in Czech Republic. There's these amazing sandstone towers in Czech Republic, and the lines aren't even that high, but they're just so beautiful and like nestled in, you know, these kind of valleys with lots of trees. And there's just something about that place that feels a little bit like a fairy tale. And then, of course, Moab, where I live. I mean, it's incredible here. It's a land of canyons and cliffs, and it's a red desert. It looks like Mars. And it's just, it's beautiful.
Yeah. I've seen some photographs of you doing it, and they are some of the most stunning photographs I've ever seen, especially when you see a tiny little person, you know, in the middle of of a mountain range. I just think and those are the kind of things when I've seen those photographs as well, and it shows me as well, you know, and first of all, anything is possible, and that, you know, fear, if you do challenge your fears, and you walk them, and you take one step towards them at a time, like I said, some of the coolest things happen.
Exactly. And it's not about getting rid of fear. I mean, I don't think any normally functioning human is ever going to be totally fearless, but you don't have to be fearless. You can still do things even while you're scared. And, you know, there's several times in my life I've thought a lot about the fact that, like, stress and anxiety and fear, they're all kind of like energy forms in a way. And you're typically not sleepy when you're feeling afraid. And so it's like, okay, like, let me look at this like a tool or an opportunity to learn, and a type of energy that I can apply to the situation.
That's a really interesting way, actually. You're right, because when you're scared, you're not sleepy.
You don't want to take a nap.
No, you don't want to take a nap. You don't want to do the thing that you're scared to do. But it's not about taking a nap, but you're right. You can channel that fear into the energy to do the thing that scares you.
I've seen like quite a few highliners who are beginners, and they're terrified, and they're out there trying, and they'll like scream and shout, but it's not really, it's like a happiness almost, like they're exhilarated. They're scared, they're terrified, but like somehow releasing it like in these hoops and hollers helps them. And I really think that that's true, like finding a way to channel the fear into something that makes the experience better rather than worse.
Absolutely. Well, when I do come over that way, I am 100% going to be doing this with you.
Perfect. Please do. My company's called Elevate Outdoors. And I'm especially stoked to get more women out there. So
absolutely. I rock climb. I love the mountains. I love the outdoors. So that is, I've done slacklining between trees in the park.
Well, then you're going to be more prepared than a lot of people.
Maybe. I can't say I've successfully done a whole, start to end.
I'll get you across the line. Don't worry.
I trust you. I believe you. So we'll do it.
Anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, I was going to ask you, is there anything else that you'd like to share today?
I feel like I did a pretty thorough storytelling of my life. And I hope there's some nuggets of wisdom in there that people can take away from, you know, things I've learned. I'm young. I still have so much more to learn. So I think that it's a constantly evolving process. But you know, I feel like experiencing fear the way I have via these sports that force you to engage with it, maybe it's been a little bit of a fast track to learning some lessons in life. And it's interesting because highlining is such a manufactured challenge, right? Similar to a marathon, right? No, we don't need to do it. We don't have to run a marathon or walk a highline to survive or get food or anything. But it's like some part of our human drive wants to face those challenges, and that's why we do them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I find really interesting is with what drives you, what drives me, what drives people to want to do the things that they do that you don't need to do to survive. And I find that so fascinating as well between different people.
Yeah, it's wild. And then there's so many factors involved, like the society we grew up in and our conditioning and our parentage and all these things. But yeah, it's interesting.
It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for asking me about my story. And if anyone wants to come highline with me, they know where to find me.
Thank you, Faith, for joining me. It was a pleasure to have you on the show, and I cannot wait to join you on the Highline. So what scares you? You must be okay with failure. A lot of people go through a lot of failure to get to their dreams, one step at a time. So this week, no matter how big or small, channel your fear into the energy to do the thing that scares you most. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.